Welcome back to News Talk Television. I'm Lisa Evers. A firestorm of fury has erupted over the release of an obsessed stalker who killed his ex-girlfriend and then himself on Monday. On January 24th, New York Criminal Court Judge Lauren Duckman released convicted rapist Benito Oliver, who had been stalking his girlfriend Galina Komar for 2 years. Oliver had a long history of violent and abusive behavior, including a rape conviction when he was 16 years old and arrests in 1988 and 1989 on drug and weapons charges. Based on court transcripts, Judge Duckman slashed Oliver's bail, limited Galina Komar's order of protection, and accused prosecutors of exaggerating the severity of the beatings that Komar suffered. Judge Duckman also expressed more concern for Oliver's dog than for the terrified victim, Galina Komar. Duckman said, quote, "There is no actual physical injury, is there, other than some bruising? I'm not suggesting bruising is nice, but there's no disfigurement. There are no broken bones," end quote. In response, outraged New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani said he will seek to have Judge Duckman removed from the bench. Was this judge's ruling justified, or is this a case of bias in the courts? Joining us today to discuss this issue is Lynn Hecht-Shafran, an attorney for the Now Legal Defense and Education Fund and director of the National Judicial Education Program. Lynn says that while she's appalled by this ruling, it's not uncommon because there tends to be a total lack of understanding about domestic violence in the courts. Also joining us, Gary Brown, an attorney and executive director for the Fund for Modern Courts. Gary is also the former New York State Assistant Attorney General and says the process of bashing judges after they make a decision is really harmful. And Brian Sokoloff, a litigation attorney who works on civil rights issues, Brian says Judge Duckman's decision is not one of gender bias. Lynn, let me start with you. Why aren't you surprised by Judge Duckman's ruling?
Well, first I want to say that there are many judges across the country who are deeply concerned about domestic violence, and that the work around educating judges about domestic violence has increased substantially. So I don't want people to think that Judge Duckman is the norm. But the fact is that across the country we can recite to you chapter and verse of judges doing equally horrible things, making loathsome statements in the courtroom. In Florida, a judge in a situation where a man threw lighter fluid on his wife and set a match to her sang in the courtroom, "You light up my life." A judge in Illinois was dealing with a man who had beaten his wife with the jumper cables from a car. What he was really interested in was, did he beat her with the soft cable or did he beat her with the handles, the metal handles? There was just a case recently on ABC TV where a man was estranged from his wife, divorced from his wife, and repeatedly through this period stalking her and threatening her and terrifying her. There were tapes, there were phone calls, there was a mountain of evidence. The judge would do nothing. Finally, he broke into her home. The judge put him in an 8-hour management program. The day he graduated from the program, he broke into her home, he killed her, he killed himself in front of their younger child. And when the judge was interviewed on television as to why he put this man in an 8-hour management program, he said, "Well, I've been divorced too, and I know that that man was feeling sad and lost and lonely, and I would do the same thing again if I thought it was appropriate."
So do you think this is a gender bias? Because in this case, clearly with Galina Komar, the woman who was killed, this ex-boyfriend had come to her place of work several times. The male employees had thrown him out. He comes into where she's working, shoots her, and then shoots himself. Do you think the judge was biased against it because of an anti-female bias or some sort of misogyny?
It's an aspect of gender bias that grows out of a failure to understand the realities of something that happens to women. There are some men who are victims of domestic violence, but the vast majority of victims are women, and there is a lot of misunderstanding. People assume this is just like every now and then there's an eruption of some violence. There's a failure to understand this is a pattern of coercion and control. This man wants to own this woman's life. And this Judge Duckman said something that I think really hones in on this. At one point he said, if you give back the dog that the man is worried about and which this woman was caring for while he was in prison, there'll be no more violence.
He'll calm down, in other words.
Right. This is absurd on its face. This is factually incorrect. This is just flies in the face of all our knowledge about the way batterers obsess over their victims and control their lives.
And where there's an escalation pattern.
Absolutely.
Gary, what about this? I mean, here is a judge whose ruling resulted in the murder of a woman, a 5-year-old girl. Galina's daughter now will grow up without ever knowing her mother as an adult. What should the judge be thrown off the bench for this?
I don't think we can make that decision yet, and unfortunately I think there's been a real rush to judgment to put this judge on trial. And in a lot of ways, it's really the easy way out. Obviously, the judge's decision is indefensible. It resulted in a tragedy. But it's very easy to say, well, throw the judge off the bench. I think a more productive approach would be, let's look at the whole system, see what is it about the system that allows these kinds of events to occur, allows judges to have that kind of mindset, and deal with the issues on a much broader picture. This judge may have made the wrong decision. Obviously, he did. But we've seen a number of recent cases where judges are being attacked literally the minute they make a decision, throw them off the bench. And I don't think we want our judges making decisions based on how it's going to play on the front page of the next day's newspaper.
But, Brian, what about in a case like this where clearly, I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody that's going to come to the defense of this judge. In fact, many people have come out now, both prosecutors and attorneys, saying, look, this guy is off the wall. Why do we have people making life-and-death decisions who are unfit? This Judge Duckman has a term that goes to the year 2003.
There's no question that the judge's decision was not defensible. But your question was, at the outset of the segment, was the judge's decision defensible, or is this a case of gender bias? A, it's not defensible, but I don't think that that automatically means that it's a case of gender bias. You have a number of judges all over the country who do not treat criminal conduct with the seriousness that they should, whether the criminal's a man or a woman, whether the victim is a man or a woman. What we're talking about should be whether judges take criminal conduct seriously, whether they sentence convicted offenders to the sentence that they deserve, whether they incarcerate alleged defendants before trial with bail. That should be the issue. Just because there's a woman victim here, I don't think allows you to say that this is automatically a case of gender bias.
Lynn, what about that?
Okay, the reason I would disagree in part with that is the following. When you have situations, there's documented patterns across the country. In cases of domestic violence as opposed to stranger violence, there's a tremendous pattern of undercharging. Let's start, you want to talk about the system, let's start with the police and the prosecutors. Men who commit crimes and assaults, which if there were a stranger victim, would be charged as felonies. They involve physical assault, they involve sexual assault. These are being charged as misdemeanors because the offender is the husband or the boyfriend. Then it gets into the system, and we see over and over again judicial officers who treat stranger assault much more seriously than they treat assaults against women by their intimate partners. And when you see that pattern, that is an aspect of gender bias.
Okay, let's ask our viewers. Do you think that judges in courts are biased against women, especially in cases of domestic violence? Let us know how you feel at 1-800-618-2900. And what about judges? If they make the wrong decision, should the people be able to throw them off the bench? Let us know how you feel about that. Let's go to Dottie from Tennessee right now. Dottie, thank you for calling News Talk Television. How do you feel about this?
I think what this judge did was reprehensible. Gender bias, I don't know. The majority of people who are killed in domestic violence are women. And as I understand it, this young woman stood before the judge and showed him the bruises and everything and was pleading her case. He is indefensible. Should he be removed from the bench? Probably. I mean, you have a young woman dead and a child that doesn't have a mother any longer, and on the heels of the O.J. Simpson trial, with these other two people that are murdered, I would think the last thing he would do would be deny this young woman's request. So our justice system really seems to be getting wackier every day. I don't know if the Simpson trial brought it on or if we're just more aware of it, but he definitely did the wrong thing. And removal, if I were a mother, I would seek it, most definitely.
Okay, Daddy, thank you very much for the call. Gary, what about the fact that this, and Brian, the fact that this Oliver, Benito Oliver, the man who killed her, he had a history that went back to the age of 16 for rape. I mean, this is not somebody with an unblemished record, upstanding citizen. Drugs and weapons charges, a rape, shouldn't that play a role in a judge taking something seriously? I mean, here's a guy who's access to weapons, raped women in the past. Isn't that something that should say, hey, wait a minute, this guy is, has the capability of committing violence?
There's no question about it, and Mayor Giuliani has asked the appropriate authorities who do have the responsibility for looking into judicial conduct and judicial competence to look and see whether there is enough here to remove the judge from the bench. The judge has a term of office, but if the judge is plainly incompetent and did not focus on the